And right next to him is Ronald Bosi, who is an economist.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Happy to be here.
And Karibu. Let's get this conversation started. I'll start with you, Kakai. When Kenyans get to hear that the bill is now in Parliament for the second reading, it is a bit confusing. So just bring us up to speed with the process, just very briefly.
Okay. Of course, when we're talking about a second reading, it means that the bill was initially in Parliament for first reading. So what happens is, of course, the bill is introduced to Parliament by the respective, for instance, the finance bill, so it will be introduced by the Treasury. And it goes for first reading. So in the first reading, there is no voting, there is not much input from parliamentarians. But now after the first reading, the mandate of the bill is issued to the respective committee. Right. In this sense will be the finance committee, which is headed by Honorable Kimani Kuria, MP for Molo. Now that was the committee that was tasked to take the bill to public participation. So public participation is a constitutional right for every Kenyan under Article 118 and 119 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So whether it's a bill or a policy that is about to come into law, it must be taken to public participation.
Right.
What public participation means is that members of the public, stakeholders, organizations, for instance, FinTech Association of Kenya, Blockchain Association of Kenya, and even individuals will have a right to appear before the committee and express their concerns about specific parts of the bill.
And that just was completed?
And that was completed on 20th, yeah. I actually appeared on behalf of the Blockchain Association of Kenya to submit, particularly with respect to the proposed digital asset tax, but we'll get to that later on. Right. So that was completed about on 20th, and now the bill is moving to Parliament for the second reading where we're at.
Right. And before we continue to know what we can expect ahead, Director, we do have Kenyans on the street. Just we want to get to know your knowledge on the lawmaking process. If we can have that.
Kile ambao tumeona na utatizo ule tuko nayo. Na leo bill mahali mimi kiwango chile leo inafaa ifike stage ambazo ni karibu 4. Ipeleko pale kwenye bunge, pitie pale kwenye committees, ndiposa wakati inapeleko pia pale kwa meza iweze kudiscusswa sana wabunge ndio iweze kupitishwa hiyo bill. Lakini kidogo pia si wa Kenya wote ambao tunafahamu hii mambo zaidi, ila kidogo tuna wasiwasi na tashwishi vile mahali mapo vitu zimefika.
Sisi kulingana na mimi sijaelewako chochote kulingana na hiyo kitu. Wangekuja kwa wananchi, waongee na wananchi kwanza, waulize, ndio wananchi sasa wapate mwelekeo vile wataendelea na hiyo mambo yao.
Hii finance bill ipite. Juu sasa unajua nchi mingi watu wanalipa nini? Tax. Bongo kweli. Even this inaitwa Tanzania, watu wanalipa tax. Mbona sisi wa Kenya tunakataa kulipa tax ambapo tunataka ati sisi tuombe kila mara wazungu? Hiyo haileti mambo mzuri hapa Kenya.
Ndio mwananchi wa kawaida ama yule akona haki anaweza pinga ama upitishe.
Mswada unaendelea kupigiwa kura wa kuipitisha ama kuanguzwa.
Okay, hiyo bill kulingana vile mimi naelewa, juu kila mtu anaelewa kivyake, lakini vile mimi najua kivyangu, hiyo bill mbali na kabla sijaongea kwanza mambo mengi, kulingana na hiyo bill vile tunaiona kwanza ni bill yenye inaenda kutumiza. Juu kiangalia tutafinyiliwa saizi, maisha bado iko juu na bado hiyo bill tena kuna vile bado inatufinya, unaona?
Right, and that is our reporter David Alex, who was on the street just to try and get the understanding of Kenyans in Nairobi on the lawmaking process and the bill that is on its second reading in Parliament. What can you read from this?
Yeah, what I can read from this is the gap on how public participation is done. For context, from the perspective of public participation, they expected the finance committee to do it in like a campaign, to come to the very grassroots level and talk to them. But what happens in public participation in the context of bills is a notice is issued, probably on the Gazette, National Gazette, and circulated on medias, and guys will email their concerns through a written memo. So you see some people are not literate enough to even draft a memo. That is where the first issue comes.
Okay. And Ronald, before you get even into the economic implications, then from the vox pops that we have just seen, it shows that there seems to be a gap, because these people feel like they're not represented. If people have no idea of what went on or what is included in the Finance Bill 2023, what does that say?
Yeah, the biggest problem, of course, we have, especially in this country, is the knowledge gap. And of course, the biggest problem also, and the challenge that the government finds it, is the politicization, the politicizing of the tax administration process. Like today, I was just listening to the media, and I realized that the misinformation that is in the public domain is too much. Like I heard that someone say that now chamas are going to be taxed. But if you look at the bill, it actually doesn't say chamas. It's actually a more favorable tax policy for chamas rather than a devastating, like the way the politicization of the process is putting it. So what this indicates that there's a big gap, because most of us, especially Kenyans, we depend on the political leadership without actually looking at the biasness that they have taken. So there's a big information gap between what the bill process and what the public perceives the bill to be all about. So that is the misinformation that needs to be demystified, especially by professionals. And thank you for this program, because through this program we are able to actually break down the bill and look at what are the advantages and the disadvantages arising from the bill.
Right. And now that you brought that around, we've seen the different factions, the Kenya Kwanza government and the opposition. You see, looking at the same finance bill, and even from one of the people on the street, saying that vile naona kivyangu. So are there two ways of looking at one proposed bill?
Yeah, of course, you know, there's a lot of biasness when you look at the bill based on the industry that you're operating in.
Right.
Because there are those people who say that, oh, now you should introduce 3% for those employment because I'm not employed. And the employees are saying, no, we can't accept this. So there's always a lot of biasness in interpretation. And if you look at the public participation process, the way my colleague has said, representing the Blockchain Association, everybody is bringing their own selfish interest on the table. But the challenge I find in this bill, in terms of the finance bill, in terms of the implementation framework, it is so disruptive, especially for a government that is new in position, that has actually not won the confidence of the citizen of this country. This is the biggest challenge. So the misinformation and the misinterpretation of the bill, of course, is a selfish interest based on the industry and what you are doing. And that's what is also bringing a lot of challenges in terms of interpretation.
Right, and Kakai, majority of the stakeholders rejected this bill at the public participation stage. So now that it's in Parliament, so is there regard for their opinion or not? Because now if it moves to Parliament, then what next?
So if it moves to Parliament and their opinions or rather their feedback is not considered, of course Parliament will pass an act, but they have a right to go to court. And this is guys have gone to court several times to dispute sections of the bill. I was just telling my friend here about the Minimum Tax Act, the minimum tax proposal of 1%, which was declared unconstitutional late last year.
Right.
So this sects of people, these movements, for instance, the digital lenders are disputing the 20% tax on interest. They can move to court and pose their arguments, and the court might declare some of these provisions unconstitutional. Yeah.
Right. And Busia Senator Okiya Mtata moved to court to petition this bill, and he laid down a few things, saying the housing is a devolved function, not supposed to be a national agenda. So among the prayers that he has and the petition that he has made, what do you make of it? Does it stand a chance, and what could be the implication based on what the court says?
Number one, first of all, housing, from the perspective of housing as a big four agenda, very awesome agenda, but how they're approaching it is very punitive to Kenyans. Now, from the facts of Okiya Omtatah's position, I would feel like his petition has the strength of declaring or rendering some of the provisions of the constitution of the bill, unconstitutional.
Okay, so it is not the bill in entirety,
yes,
but
exactly. Some sections of the bill unconstitutional. Right. So, for instance, the housing tax, the housing levy, specifically the 3%. Everybody is disputing it. Employers are disputing it. Employees are disputing it. Some parliamentarians are disputing it. Everybody does not support that.
Right.
So his argument would be possibly that the public participation with regard to that section specifically was just a circus, just to prove that public participation was done, but in real sense, whoever was pushing for the bid had already made up their mind. So now that will put the court in a position to define what public participation really means. If I came to you,
what does public participation, as enshrined in our constitution, actually state?
Of course, I'm not going to state it in verbatim, but under Article 118 and 119, in every lawmaking process, every mwananchi, the guys you've interviewed in the streets, has a right to be engaged in the public participation process. And being engaged, asked about their opinions, and then the opinions are taken up and considered. So Okiya Omtatah's position might be that the opinions and arguments of the public were not considered. And for that reason, that does not amount to proper square public participation, and therefore seeks that that section specifically be declared unconstitutional. So my point is, the entire bill might not be declared unconstitutional, but specific proposals, for instance, the housing proposal, for instance, the 20% tax on digital lenders, and specific proposals might be declared unconstitutional, such that the proposals are put on hold and the rest of the bill moves.
Right. And Ronald, before we move into your more specialized part, which is just now to break down some of these proposals, I want to bring in the opinion of the opposition, and of course led by Azimio leader Raila Odinga, saying that terming the bill as economic sabotage. That was earlier today. So the implications of this bill, if it is passed.
Yes.
Let us know about that.
Okay, just before I go to that, you will allow me to talk about what he's talked about, the housing levy, which is one of the most controversial provision of this bill. And the biggest problem we have is not the problem with the housing levy. The problem is the trust that the citizens have towards the government with regards to other levies. For instance, like the NHIF. How many Kenyans pay NHIF? And today you can go to a hospital, you've paid NHIF more than, actually 50,000-60,000 shillings, and they can only pay you 2,000 shillings. And sometimes they don't pay, and they don't even actually refund. You've had a lot of outcry in hospitals that they are not being paid the money that they used to treat various patients under the NHIF contribution. So the biggest problem is trust. If they would actually, the government would have actually developed trust among citizens by making sure that the NHIF people contribute is more effectively applied, and when you have contributed to it, you are able to get treatment from hospitals without bias and with a lot of efficiency and effectiveness, then that we can go and contribute to the housing levy. People pay NSSF, and you will be told stories of people who have been pursuing NSSF refunds for the longest time possible.
Right. And
you're introducing another levy. So the biggest problem we have with these taxes is the trust that the citizens have on government. And I was just in Rwanda the other day when you called me for this program. And one of the things I know in Rwanda, mostly they communicate, governments communicate in a number of days. You are told if you want a work permit, you'll get it within 7 days. If you want, for instance, your tax refunds, you will get it within this particular timeline. They are talking in terms of days, number of days. They're actually promising some timelines of service delivery. In Kenya, you go and apply a simple thing like even issues to do with the clearance from the DCI. You're told it will take 30 days DCI clearance.
Right.
So you realize that there's a lot of ineffectiveness and very poor service delivery within the government, and they're demanding more and more from the citizen. And that's one of the things that is contributing to the failure with regards to this housing levy. Now, coming to the opposition,
right,
and when they say that the economic sabotage, Of course, oppositions have to push the government, and sometimes opposition never wishes the government to succeed. But it's a two-way sword. It's either can be government sabotage or government prosperity. But this might be government sabotage because where we are now, people have developed some sense of mistrust to the government, and people are not willing to pay in more and more because the government has, they place the timing of introduction of most of these tax provisions is not the right time, because you see the inflation is rising. The government has been promising that they're going to cut on inflation, but that's not happening, and then it's demanding more from the government. So you realize that from the citizens, so you find that people's salaries are not growing. People's salaries have remained static against the backdrop of rising cost of living. So when these taxes actually are going to be introduced, there's going to be a lot of outcry, there's going to be a lot of rebellion. Some people might not just comply. Companies might shift bases into other, because you see currently as a country there's a global we are global citizens. Nowadays, countries have opened boundaries. People can trade in any other countries.
Right.
So how, as a country, are we increasing our competitive positioning by making sure that the cost of doing business, the cost of employment, because you say that employers will contribute 3%, employee 3%. It looks like a very simple thing. But as an employer, when you reduce employees' funds, they will actually leave employment because they say you cannot deduct me without compensating me for that. Actually, employees don't care so much about what is paid as the saving. They care much what they take home. So when you reduce their take home, you're going to bring in a lot of anarchy, and people are going to be discontented, right. And you're going to actually bring in a lot of conflicts. So it is going to be a very big economic shutdown, because you're going to realize that there's going to be people revolting against these taxes, and of course there's a continued public outcry, right, on the taxes. Yeah.
And what do you make of the government's plan? There's removal of subsidies and of course increasing of taxes from an economist point of view.
One is that is a very wrong move, and I know we were here with you last time and we talked about the issues of subsidies. As a government, you know, taxes are they're normally used to regulate the economic activities, and there are those economic activities that are drivers of the economy. So for instance, when you talk about lowering the cost of food, and you've removed subsidies on fuel, and yet fuel, most of the large farmers, they use tractors to till their land. Right. Then you are actually not doing, it's counterproductive, because you know, when you just lower the cost of fertilizer, which is a very one small input in the production process, but then the cost of fuel, which is the tractors of tilling the land, has gone up. The electricity that is used, especially for drying, and if you are in the, for instance, in chicken farming, the electricity is very paramount, and the cost of bills is going up. It's counterproductive. Therefore, you're not, subsidies are supposed to try to regulate the cost of input to make productivity more accessible. So the removal of subsidies is actually unfounded. It's not a smart way of regulating the economic activities. Because if you rather will want to remove the subsidies, then you better remove the taxes. Because when you remove taxes on, you remove the subsidies on fuel and tax the fuel more, and then you're actually jeopardizing the citizen life. Because if you wanted to actually remove subsidies, then if you have actually removed the taxes that are applicable on fuel, if you look at the electricity, there's a lot of also taxes and VAT. Right. There's levies that have added on the electricity costs. So that actually is counterproductive with regards to the economic growth.
Right. And of course, from the public, then there was an outcry and there was a protest earlier this week on the streets. We know that we have passed the public participation stage, but what power do the people still have, and can they do anything that will influence a change in some sections of the proposed bill? Is there any power they have at this point?
So once the public participation stage is passed, usually, unless, for instance, Omtata's petition succeeds and the committee, the financial planning committee, is mandated to take the bill back to public participation and now properly consider the views of the public. That is one way to look at it. Right. But if that is the best case scenario, the worst case scenario is it will go to the committees, the second reading and third reading and presidential assent, given that the regime has demonstrated its eagerness to sign the bill. But the best case scenario is having the court direct the bill back to public participation.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so at this point in time, being out on the streets to demonstrate a part of the proposed bill? So it has no effect at this stage?
From a legal perspective,
Right.
it has no effect. From a political perspective, they might end up moving their parliamentarians and their MPs, lobbying with them for them to vote against the bill. Because now these guys are constituents, these guys are constituents of different constituencies. So by them demonstrating is that they're crying to their parliamentarians, we voted you in for you to protect us, now vote against this bill.
So it's still up to the legislators now
Yeah.
to look at the people and hear the
Exactly.
voices and now represent them.
Exactly, at this stage it's still up to the legislators.
Okay, and looking at the prayers of Okia Omtata as well, some of the things that he was talking about, there's one thing that I wanted to pick out, saying that the executive is disregarding parliament. We've seen the president as well as the deputy president then saying that this bill must pass. So perhaps in a way disregarding the legislative process. What do you make of it from a low perspective?
That's an interesting perspective, and that is one ground why his petition will succeed. A very awesome ground. It's based on the doctrine of separation of powers.
Right.
The doctrine of separation of powers is a legal principle that says the arms of government need to operate separately. The executive, the judiciary, and the legislature need to operate separately without one interfering with the mandate of the other. But when you find an executive that is very eager to compel parliament to move things in their favor, that actually violates the doctrine of separation of powers, which is one doctrine that our 2010 constitution is premised on. Right. So on that premise, some of the provisions of that bill might actually be declared unconstitutional, which gives more weight to Okia Omtata's petition. That is a very strong petition and a very strong argument from a constitutional perspective.
Okay, Ronald, I'll let you weigh in on the same before we can move forward just to look at the proposals.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe just to continue on the topic of the where there's going to be an economic challenge and economic sabotage. One of the challenges or the place that this government finds itself is one, the issue of forex, the rising dollar against the shilling. And why is there a rising dollar of shillings? Because one, our imports are more than our exports. So there's a lot of demand or rush for people to buy the dollar. Two, if I don't know whether the government has weighed in this situation whereby there's a lot of capital flight. People are really moving their money from the country. Maybe it's because of due to public confidence in our political system, or some of the pronouncements that are being made on a day-to-day basis, really making sure that our currency is deflecting, badly over the dollar. And then the challenge we have now is the cost of living. And maybe some of the things, that is going to lead us in a very bad situation. And every time I see, especially people complaining about the inflation and the prices rising, especially now we talk about sugar, I hear the government responding and say, oh, we are going to import. It's quite a very myopic response to some of those things. Because you say when you're going to import, you still demand the dollar to impart those things. So you're actually jeopardizing even your debt situation. As you had the economic advice, the government said that the more the dollar increases, the more the government debt increases. So you are jeopardizing even your debt problem, because the best way to correct an inflation and to even correct the dollar exchange is to actually import raw materials. If you're looking about sugar, what is actually stopping the sugar productivity? Probably the sugar prices are not high because of lack of enough sugar. The sugar prices are high because of input cost, the input that the producers are incurring. So instead of actually trying to look at the factors that are affecting the sugar prices, you are just going to import and jeopardizing your dollar situation. So those are some of the things that are really going to lead the government in a very big problem. But there's always some low-hanging fruits that I always realize that the government is not taking advantage of. One of the low-hanging fruits that this government can actually take advantage of is tourism, because you don't need a lot of money in order to attract tourism in this country. So you realize there's sport tourism. Now you're going to talk about safari rally. And if you actually, then you're talking about also meetings and conferences, conference tourism. So you realize that these events bring in a lot of dollar inflow. And we have safari that we have not even cracked the surface in terms of utilizing it, in terms of allowing dollar inflow.
Right.
If the country can actually capitalize on these items, promote conference tourism, if you look at our conferences, the way they are located, even KICC now, it looks like more it's not as attractive, especially if you look at our regional competitors, countries. So they need to really build on conference tourism, leverage on sports tourism by making sure that like things like Safari Rally, the government is completely invested in it, and also Safari to make sure that there's a dollar inflow. That will help us to mitigate the dollar impact on the Kenya shilling. The other area that they can also leverage is agriculture. Today there's a big outcry in Kericho about the investors being attacked and kicked out of the shambas and all that. If that is not corrected, because tea export is actually one of the biggest dollar earning in this country. If the government doesn't proactively move in to restore the tea export and make sure that they stabilize those prices, and coffee, they're going to lose more and more against the dollar. So those low-hanging fruits, they're not being taken advantage of. In case the government is just coming in, every time there's a problem, they say we're going to import, without necessarily looking at how do we ensure that there's a lot of dollar inflow. And the other aspect of ensuring economic stability through this budget is also public confidence. What I realize that with most of the government officials, they don't seem to weigh in their words. Every statement they make towards investors, you realize the other time there was a raid on private property by some individuals. That actually is giving a lot of cold feet to anybody who is seeking to invest in the country. Look at our lands registry. The time that it's taking to actually transfer property is quite long. That's making us, in terms of the cost of doing business and even the ease of doing business, we are doing so badly compared to our regional partner. So the government should actually prioritize the cost and the ease of doing business, should actually encourage more exports, should actually subsidize those very important factors in production to restore the economy, rather than just hurrying to raise more taxes. And at the same time, make government service delivery more efficient and effective, and promise on some timeline. And the other issue is what we've talked about, remove corruption. Those are things that will actually help the government to restore the economy, rather than saying we shall do, it's so easy to tax people, but very difficult to actually change the behavior of the government in terms of spending and also service delivery.
Okay, and speaking on corruption, Azimio leader Raila Odinga has given the president a few demands, and then one of them was, again, instead of the big budget, the proposed finance bill of 2023-2024, then to seal the holes of corruption. But now, given our history, where would you think the government should start?
Where would I think the government should start? I think the biggest corruption scandals of late have been procurement scandals. So if the government can streamline their procurement processes, that would go a long way. But even before we get to corruption, there's just some very, very unreasonable expenditures. Like the recent, was it CS, somebody was traveling abroad and they were traveling about a fleet of 7 people, a gym instructor, 2 makeup artists. There's a lot of unreasonable expenditures in specific government offices. So even before we get to dealing with corruption, from a fiscal perspective, just auditing how expenditure and allowances are dished out, that is where, because that is a form of justifiable corruption. As long as I give you give me a service and you can receipt it, we are good to go. I give you government money. That's one way to look at it. Then the second thing now, cracking down on procurement corruption. But now the problem is that if you have a regime that is trying to award people that supported it, and sorry to say this, but when DP went live and said that this country has shareholders, so statements like that even shock us. Like who should we run to protect us from a corrupt leader?
So it doesn't do much for the public trust.
Exactly, it doesn't do much to the public trust. And this is what my friend here is talking about. Public trust goes a long way. We have some jurisdictions, for instance, in Europe, where guys are paying higher taxes. But given that services are good, their health is stable, everything is awesome, they don't have so many issues. But when you have an NHIF where all private hospitals are barring, they're saying we're no longer taking NHIF because NHIF right now has over 20 billion Kenyan shillings in debt to private hospitals. It doesn't do much to public confidence. So corruption is just a whole cancer that we need to decipher as Kenyans, from procurement corruption all the way to kickbacks and a lot of other forms of corruption that the government and even us as Kenyans need to know how to handle.
Okay, in our own small capacities.
Yeah.
Okay, and there has been a lot of comparison between Kenya and Singapore. Because our governments are about the same age. So then what do you make of it? It's a smaller country, obviously, but compared to almost the size of Nairobi city.
Yes.
But so what do you think perhaps Kenya can learn from it?
One is leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And you know, the biggest challenge and the gap we have in this country is leadership. Like what my colleague has said, the issue of corruption, which is bedeviling our country, you can't find it in countries like Singapore. If you look at the president of Singapore, and someone was explaining on how they transformed Singapore, is to make sure that you're not just employing people for the sake of it, just because of not their political loyalty, but because of competence. And one of the things, when you talk about corruption, it's so ridiculous that a government that is struggling to win Kenyans' trust is not fighting a bill that is being sponsored to remove all issues to do with corruption malpractices, to decriminalize them. And somebody is sponsoring such a bill in parliament. If a government is very sincere and very objective in terms of restoring public trust, they will fight such a bill in the strongest terms possible, the same way they will actually fight to pass this tax bill. If they do that, then they are going to actually cut on cost. Because as I say that most of our costs in government, our over cost is because of the procurement malpractices. And if somebody is even sponsoring a bill to make things even more devastating by ensuring that those who commit procurement crimes are not criminalized, then it's quite a big problem. And those are some of the things that Singapore did. One is corruption issue. Two is competency, making sure that there's competent people in public offices. And the effective service delivery. And the other issue is behavioral change. From public service, how do you assess services? Do you pay for things and you don't get? If we procure for somebody to develop a road, is probably find 50% of the money is for the road construction, 50% is pocketed. Once we address those inefficiencies, then we will be able to talk about Singapore. So you see, the other time the president was interviewed, he was comparing Kenya and France, and countries like France in terms of their contribution of tax to the GDP. But one of the things that I will also wish the government to compare is the efficiency of service delivery between these two countries. It's actually world apart. This country is collecting higher taxes, but is effectively utilizing. Because what is the essence of me paying NHIF, at the same time paying a private insurance company for my medical insurance? Actually, that is equivalent to robbery by the government. Government is robbing me, and then is asking me also to contribute some money in form of housing levy, which they have not guaranteed you that they are going to safeguard the utilization of that those resources. So that's the difference between us and Singapore and other countries that are progressive. And leadership is very key in all these aspects. Which leaders are in public offices? What do they say? Are they committed? Are they walking the talk in terms of what they say they are going to do and what they are doing individually? Because if you find that government is overspending and the bills, the budget is increasing, especially in some public offices, and we are talking about austerity measures, then the government seems insincere. And that is what is actually bringing in a very big disparity. As it is now, I feel, and especially from the streets, people are feeling that they have a government that doesn't care, and that is what is leading to the problem we have in the country is hopelessness. And the challenge is we are not finding that hope in the leadership. So they need to communicate hope by restoring public confidence in terms of restoring integrity in the public offices, communicating a strategy in terms of how they are going to revive the economy, and making sure that the right people are in the right places.
Okay.
Yes.
And our time is running up, but before we go, then just bring us to speed what the next stage is now that we are on stage 2 in Parliament. So what's the next stage?
So of course, stage 2 in Parliament, first of all, is has 2 steps. First of all, there's a committee stage where the parliamentarians would sit in form of a committee, in the state of a committee, and go through the proposals in the bill clause by clause and vote for them. Then after that, they'll go to report stage and report on what has been approved and what has not. So after that, the bill will now go to the 3rd reading, which is primarily just, there's not much voting in terms of substance, because now substance is happening right now. The specific clauses that needs to be voted in or removed is happening right now.
Right.
Clause 3 is just basically approving the structure and all that. Then stage 4 is now the presidential assent stage. Now we've seen in previous years, in 2018 and I think 2019, whereby when it gets to presidential assent stage, the president has the mandate to say, no, this bill is not in order. Please look at it again. And as a Kenyan president, hearing the public outcry from people, I would expect His Excellency William Ruto to do that probably if Parliament passes the bill. In best case scenario, he says, no, guys have cried too much, please relook at this bill. So the president has the power to send the bill back to Parliament to relook at it. So worst case scenario, of course, if he approves the bill, it becomes an act. But then again, I've said, the public always has an option to go to court and say the doctrine of separation of powers was disregarded, that their opinions as the public were disregarded, and to that extent, sections of the bill should be declared unconstitutional.
So at what point can the public now go to court?
Okiya Omtata is part of the public. He's already in court. So at any stage, they can go.
So at any stage of this lawmaking process?
The moment you walk into the committee and you feel like the committee did not listen to you, you file a petition to court and say, no, this guy did not listen to me. I also just wanted to comment on the juxtaposition between Kenya and Singapore. And the other thing I wanted to add in was in terms of investor confidence. In the sense that two things influence investor confidence. That is political stability and predictability. And I just wanted to wrap this up with the proposed national tax policy that was circulated last year. We're yet also taken through public participation. We're yet to see the final draft this year. So that draft will design how the national tax policy of Kenya would look 5 years from now. Such things will inform how investors will want to position themselves, whether they want to exit this jurisdiction or they want to be attracted. And also the elements of political stability go a long way in determining the direction to which the GDP of a country goes and to which generally the stability of the economy will look like.
Right, and Ronald, as we wind up and you give your final remarks, are there any proposals in the finance bill from an economist, a business person point of view that you feel like are in the favor of the business community?
Okay, when I look at the finance bill, there are not many, because one of these things that we realize that this finance bill is very disruptive. So there are more devastating provisions as compared to anything that is positive. But a few positives though. So we have issues to do with, especially when it comes to like taxation or the capital allowances.
Right.
There's been issues to restore some capital allowances, especially for those construction companies. And also when it comes to, I'm trying to find, but it's very difficult. Yeah.
As you try to dig in there, there is the import fee which has been lowered.
Yeah.
But you did say then that we need to export more, than import.
Of course.
So what is this proposal?
Yeah, you see, one of the things when it comes to excise duty, initially the bill, the Finance Act of 2022 had given the Commissioner General power to vary the excise duty every time there's variation in terms of inflation.
Right.
But now I'm so happy that this finance bill removes that powers from the finance bill. Through this finance bill, that power is removed. Because initially, you know, the Commissioner General has been very aggressive every year, varying the excess duty up and up. And then the other issue that benefit that is coming with this Finance Act is the issue of rental. That's monthly rental tax.
Right.
So it's been reduced from 10% to 7.5%, especially for those, because considering the fact that you know, when you construct any houses for rental, there is no capital allowances. So for them to reduce the monthly rental from 10% to 7.5% is okay. But for me, I will consider that they also allow capital allowances in construction of rental houses instead of actually just lowering the monthly rental tax. That will actually increase people investing in more decent houses and low-cost housing. So those are some of the few benefits that are there. And of course, some of the taxes are, I know there's issue and an outcry with those digital creation and all that, making it 15% withholding tax on the digital content is a bit aggressive, but we all expect that there must be some taxation for the digital, they could have actually made it 5% instead of 15%. Then the other benefit I see also, especially for the chamas, because there's been a lot of misinformation with regards to chamas.
Right.
The issue, because initially in the previous finance bill, all chamas were being, all the subscriptions, especially if they are less than 75%, were being subjected to tax. But this finance bill explicitly says that if you're contributing within a chama, all the subscription income and member contributions and penalties within members are not taxable, except when the chama is doing business. Only business income is taxed. That is
Right.
a favorable and welcome move by the government to actually try to encourage investment through chamas.
Right.
Yeah, so there are some few good things in the bill. Yeah.
Can I chip in?
Okay, thank you. I do understand we have to finish, but okay, very briefly, in a few seconds.
Another thing is the cryptocurrencies perspective, the digital asset tax. For a long time, the government has been very uncertain on whether they want to regulate or not regulate cryptocurrencies based on the CBK's directive on that. But the government trying to tax crypto, to some extent, they are declaring a form of legitimacy and acknowledging this the sector of the economy. So as much as it's a tax that is hard on the crypto community, to some extent, by taxing it, you are giving it a green light.
Right.
So that is potentially a welcome move with further review, because it had some issues, but generally that move implies that the government is acknowledging this as a sector of the society, and we are really excited to see now the nitty-gritties of the details of how such a tax will look like in practice.
Right, and thank you. I know this is an ever-ending conversation. The bill is in Parliament for the second reading, and so we'll have more conversations as we move to the next stage or not, depending on how things go. Again, we'll be right here to bring you up to speed. That is all we had for you this evening. We have been looking at the Finance Bill 2023, the lawmaking process, as well as the economic implications. With me on set, right next to me has been S.A. Kakai, an advocate and policy analyst, and Ronald Bosi, who is an economist. Let's keep the conversation going across all our social media platforms. And of course, hashtag is Lookup News, and Lookup TV on Twitter, Lookup TV on Facebook, and Lookup TV on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you for watching. Our sign language interpreter for tonight has been Angel Lois. I am Nancy Nelimo. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening and good night.